Hey guys, Jeremy here and welcome to my most recent video. Today's video is a really special one because it's a recap of the 2019 Cancon ITC 40K Championship events. Bit of a mouthful, but Cancon has been a massively long-running institution as far as wargaming goes in Australia. And we just got back from the most recent tournament. And of course, it's a really special one. It's Australia, as I've mentioned in previous videos, it's kind of like Australia's LVO. This year got, I think, just shy of 150 players, which is Cancon's biggest ever turnout, which is really huge. And it's really impressive for Australia to be able to get a tournament that big, with such a competitive field. And it really was a competitive field. Amazing players, some really kind of tough games going on all the time. It was a fantastic event. So today's video, I wanted to touch on a few things. I'm going to discuss my own experience at Cancon. I was fortunate enough to come second this year. I had won the previous two Cancon, so I've been a little bit of a Cancon dominator as far as it goes. But this year I was pipped by Eric Lathuris, who couldn't have been a more deserving winner. Eric's an amazing guy. He's a good friend of mine, and he dominated not only Cancon this year, but he's had a fantastic win streak with Tyranids, and I think he's gone something like 25 or 30 games in a row undefeated in tournament play with NID. So he's a very deserving winner of Cancon this year, and I'm honored to be able to come second to Eric. And so this video today is going to be a discussion of my list, and people that are looking intently might notice that I didn't actually play Grey Knights this year at Cancon. So I have been doing a lot of a hobby kind of and tactical kind of focus on Grey Knights throughout the 2018 ITC season. But as is normal with me with Cancon, because I do value Cancon as kind of a very competitive, prestigious event, I like to spice it up a little bit. A couple of years ago, I took the Bark Star. Previous year, I took Yanari. My list was very similar to Nick Nanavati's list, and it was written and conceived around the same time. This year, I decided to spice it up even more. I wanted to come up with something that was totally off meta, totally fresh and new. And it's interesting because at the time of list submission for Cancon, no one was talking about Deathwatch. Deathwatch was totally obscure, and I kind of brewed this really kind of janky list that I thought was really good. But since list submission, Deathwatch have kind of exploded on social media. And I've seen a lot of people posting videos, people posting lists, people asking about tactics, especially in lieu of the kind of recent bolter. Kind of bolter beta rules that are being talked about and that are coming out or have come out, and they weren't in effect at Cancon. It's worth kind of noting and precursing that right now. But Deathwatch have certainly become something that's on the tip of everyone's tongue. But at the time of writing my list, no one was talking about Deathwatch. So I was really happy with the fact that I was coming up with something that I thought would be really fun to play. It drew on some of my experience with using Grey Knight. So for those that are Grey Knight fans that are watching this video, there is a lot of interchangeability between the two factions. And that's not to say that if you're a Grey Knight player, you should or could just, play Deathwatch, but they're both kind of elite Marines. If you love that fantasy, that narrative of the best Marines, both Grey Knights and Deathwatch capture that narrative and allow you to experience that on the tabletop. And I had a lot of fun with Deathwatch at Cancon. So I guess my original shout out was I wanted to congratulate Eric, wanted to give a bit of a preview of why I took Deathwatch, what was going on. Before I get started with my actual list, I will mention that what my thought process was with Deathwatch, because some people might think, well, cool, you've come up with this Deathwatch list off meta. Why did you write a list like that? And the reason was, and I'm not going to say this is unique to me. I think this is clearly through the explosion on social media. A lot of people are thinking about this. Deathwatch have always been strong, right? Even in 7th edition when the Codex released, the rules were good. The problem was, and as was in 8th edition, they were just too expensive. Things just cost too much, as is the case with Grey Knights as well. You get a good unit. Your unit, when you put it on the tabletop, when you explain the rules, it sounds impressive. But the problem with Deathwatch previously prior to the chapter approved was that you didn't get your bang for your buck. They were good, they could function well, but unfortunately they didn't compete with value or on value terms with other top tier armies. But since chapter approved, some very relevant things occurred. And I'll kind of go through those because that's why I feel like Deathwatch is now becoming a much more powerful force in the metagame. The first thing that happened was veterans just went down in points costs. And more importantly than veterans, because veterans only went down 1 point per model, Terminators went down quite a lot. I think they went down something like 7 points. That's probably not right, but they dropped quite a bit. And what's even more relevant is that Deathwatch Terminators don't have to take power fists. So where something like a normal Space Marine Terminator tactical Termi has to have a fist, which is quite an expensive kind of commitment, Deathwatch Termis can just take power swords. So when you're able to have mixed units and mixed Terminators with veterans, having points reductions on all of those kind of types of models, as well as the bikes went down in cost as well. So all these different elements of the mixed unit went down. So the kill teams just dropped quite significantly in points. It's also worth noting that Storm Shields, and this is a change that will apply not just to Deathwatch, this is kind of like Marine-wide change. I did mention it in my previous video about Grey Knights, that unfortunately Grey Knights don't get any benefit from Storm Shields so much. But Storm Shields going down from 5 to 2 points is huge, right? That is a huge change because when you're paying 5 points per model for something, you really want to kind of feel like you're getting a relevant piece of war gear that's going to bring you value all the time. So a ranged weapon, for example, when you pay for a ranged weapon, if it's a good ranged weapon, you feel okay about it because it's something that you can reliably get value out of. But when you're paying for a Storm Shield, it's something that might not always be relevant. If you're getting hit with AP dash guns, Storm Shields aren't going to be relevant. So when you're paying kind of 5 points, or sometimes in the past they were more, you kind of have to really, I guess, question and make sure and analyze whether or not that's worth it. But when they cost 2 points, it starts to become quite a kind of auto-include. When you're spending 2 points for something, if it's going to give you a good bonus, which Storm Shield does, then they just become an auto-include. And when you're able to take something like, let's say, 20 Storm Shields over an army, my army had 6 per kill team, so I had 18. That works out to be quite a big points reduction, right? That's like a 54 points reduction just from the Storm Shields. So you start to accrue value, and that's what happened with Deathwatch. All these different things went down in cost, and then you look at that kind of battalion and you're like, you know what? This is actually pretty good. And that's what happened with me. I started to think about the special ammunition, and special ammunition for Deathwatch is what makes them a cut above normal Marines. So much so that explaining this to new players or to people who were approaching me at Cancon, I ended up going 7 wins and 1 loss. And as I mentioned earlier, I came second overall. People were kind of saying, how are you doing this with Deathwatch? Like, aren't Deathwatch just shit? Like, aren't they just Marines? Well, the answer is no, they aren't just Marines. Like, when you look at a unit of Deathwatch on the table, yes, they look like Marines, right? Sure, they're a mixed unit, but the aesthetic, the badass factor and all that's all there. But the actual rules resemble anything but a Marine unit. They seem to be more something like, I would say, like a Dark Eldar or Eldar style unit. The whole kind of falling back, shooting, falling back, assaulting, kind of poison weapons. This is not how Marines normally fight, right? And it makes sense that Marines that are fighting aliens, the Xenos hunters, they're adapting to the context of how they're going to have to fight these battles. So special ammo is huge for Deathwatch. And when I was thinking about Deathwatch and looking at their special ammo, it's really relevant in the metagame. And the primary kind of element of that, the best ammo that I was using most of the time was the, you know what, I don't actually remember the names, it's pretty bad, but the round that gives you the 2+ to wounding on 2s. And that is pretty fantastic when you think about often, like if you're shooting into something that's toughness 4, which a lot of the big Gribblies, like a lot of units like the Plague Bearers, things that you're thinking about putting shots into, going from wounding on 4s to wounding on 2s, especially when you factor in that mission tactics will often let you be re-rolling 1s. So a normal Marine would be wounding on 4s, and a Deathwatch Marine will be wounding on 2s, re-rolling 1s, which is almost, it's like a 97% success chance. That's very, very close to double damage, right? That's assuming equal amount of shots. And Deathwatch all have Storm Bolters. So that's, if you compare them to a normal Marine, they're putting out basically 4 times as much damage. and that's only for a few points more per model. It's pretty insane. So when I was thinking about the metagame, I thought, look, I'm expecting to see plague bearers and demons, so I want to be able to leverage that kind of 2+ to wound round. I also thought, you know what, it's very likely there's going to be some orcs, maybe some T5 orcs, maybe like people talking about grotesques. Being able to even go from wounding on 5s to wounding on 2s is even a bigger, huge change in the way the maths works out. And then there are other ammunition types aren't bad. Being able to fire it up to 30 inches range with 1 AP is good. That's a perfectly good style of ammunition. It means you can play a more cagey game. It means your opponents will kind of think, okay, they're not expecting you to be able to fight at specific break points as far as range goes. And more relevantly, it means you're going to rapid fire at 15, or at least in the rules we use. Now rapid fire is kind of totally changed for Marines, but it meant that often in Overwatch, players would people are used to kind of deploying their models in such a way that maybe that only a couple are within rapid fire range of your unit. So you might get rapid fire on a couple of models, and then the rest of your Overwatch will be just single shot. But if you're using the 15-inch rapid fire ammo, then you'll be able to shoot 4 shots with every Marine. And that, when you take a Watchmaster, which you'll notice I do have in my list, that Overwatch was taking a massive toll on some opponents. Whether I was using, the 2+ to wound round, whether I was using the negative AP round, it didn't really matter. I was getting a lot of value out of the Overwatch. Moving forward, so the special ammo was a very strong factor. Another factor was the ITC mission style, mission format. And I'm a big proponent, like I've made videos in the past who've discussed how important mission packs are and scoring types are, like when you're writing a list. Like a list that's good for an ITC event might not be good for an ETC mission event, or a kind of a homebrew tournament that your friend might be running, or that a local game store might be running. You got to look at the mission pack and how scoring's done before you write your list. And with ITC, primary is a very important part of ITC, often because the way primary works is that a single unit being killed can often be the difference between 2 points being scored on the score sheet. Because, for example, if your opponent kills a unit, you being able to kill that unit, finish a unit off, or not get a unit of yours kills, means that it might be the difference between your opponent not getting kill more and you getting kill more, right? It ends up being like a swing of 2 points at times, depending on the exact way it works out. So being able to deny your opponent from killing things, and often creating a situation where they don't kill anything in a turn, is extremely important in ITC missions. In not only scoring points, which is a very kind of linear and basic kind of strategic concept, but more importantly, in creating psychological pressure. If you're able to, in a game of 40K, go put your opponent in a position where in their turn 1, maybe they hold an objective, or at least one objective, maybe they don't kill a unit, they only score a point. And then turn 2, if they also hold, maybe they hold more than you, but they don't kill a unit, they only score 2 points. Meanwhile, you're scoring secondary points, you're killing more than them, you're also holding objectives, and you're kind of moving ahead on primary. You're winning the game from a very early position before kind of like the traditional battle has even started. And it puts this pressure on your opponent to need to do something. And what's really interesting, and like I'll give full credit to Eric here, is in the game I lost in the event against Eric actually put the psychological pressure on me. And that's how he was able to force a mistake out of me that really allowed him to solidify his win. So full kudos to Eric for using a very similar strategy of using psychological pressure to force mistakes. And that's what I like to do with my list. I like to minimize the amount of kill points I have, make my units extremely difficult to kill, so that my opponents really struggle to satisfy that objective of killing at least 1 unit per turn. So if you look at a Deathwatch kill team, and at this point we'll kind of look at the first element of my list, which is my kill teams. I won't discuss the HQs yet. We'll go through the full list kind of in a sec. But you'll notice I've got, in my kill teams, I've got 5 veterans. You get a free upgrade to a Watch Sergeant. And they all have Storm Shields and Storm Bolters. So that's like the crux of any Deathwatch veteran unit. And then I had 3 Terminators in the unit. I had one with a Cyclone Missile Launcher and a Power Fist. And he was my kind of last model in the unit. He was the heroic veteran that would be there until the end, firing his missile launcher and swinging his fist until until everything blacked out. But the other 2 Terminators just had Storm Bolters, which are obviously extremely good with special ammo, and power swords. So they were pretty cheap. And those Terminators allowed me to have 2-up armor save ablative wounds in my mixed unit. So I had this situation where I had a couple of models, a couple of Terminators that were kind of throwaway models with 2-up saves. Then I had 5 veterans with storm shields. I also gave my Vanguard veteran a storm shield. He had a storm shield and a bolt pistol. Vanguard vets mean that when you leave combat, when you fall back with your unit, you can shoot as though you had the fly rule. So Vanguard vets are an auto include in a Deathwatch kill team. So far I've got 5 vets, 3 Terminators, a Vanguard vet, and of course I also added in a biker. Now biker is a bit unassuming as far as like what he brings to the unit in terms of his actual like fighting capability, but the utility of the biker is the most important model in the Deathwatch kill team. He allows you to fall back and assault, which is a good tool to have. It certainly came up multiple times when you get kind of locked, you fall back, you shoot something, you kill an entire unit, you go somewhere else, and you reestablish kind of that fight that may have been already going on, except you get to fight first, finish off the unit. But more importantly than that rule, he actually brings the Deathwatch teleport homer. So anyone that's familiar with Deathwatch will know this rule, but for those that don't, I'll mention it. Basically what it means is that when you deploy your army, you deploy teleport homers for every biker that brings a teleport homer in your list. So if you have a unit of bikes, they will give you a teleport homer. If you just have one biker in a Deathwatch kill team, he also gives you a teleport homer. So just my 3 kill teams, which were all the same, they're all homogenous, all had that bike, which meant I had 3 beacons. So I was able to deploy 3 beacons on the table, which meant that at any point, as long as my unit had 1 Terminator left in it, which was always the case because my Cyclone Terminator was always the last model to die, it meant that I could fall out of combat. I could teleport to a beacon. So the rule is as long as at least one model is a Terminator, you can teleport. And that is extremely powerful rule because basically the implication is if you can't be pinned in combat, you can't get wrapped. So as people watching this, a lot of people will be familiar with the idea that strong players that are using combat armies will pin a unit, they'll surround a model so that that unit cannot fall back out of combat, which means that the unit that's pinning your unit can't be shot in the shooting phase. But Deathwatch are immune to that because if they pin you, you just teleport out with your beacons. So the unit was extremely robust. It had mixed armor saves. I could take AP, like AP2, AP3 saves on my storm shields that would normally kind of really pressure a marine unit. I'm taking 3-up invulnerable saves against that. And anything that was just AP dash, I was taking on Terminators. And that's an extremely powerful tool. As soon as kind of I started to conceptualize how this was going to work, it just reminds you, it evokes the days of 7th edition when you used to have mixed Death Stars and you used to have different characters that would juggle different profiled attacks on them depending what was optimal. And that's what a Deathwatch kill team can do in 8th edition. So kill teams are extremely robust, extremely powerful, put out a lot of damage. I was rolling 37 dice in rapid fire range, 36 from my Storm Bolters and the extra 1 from the pistol. That is a lot of special ammo shots. Really, really good and very taxing on Overwatch, as I said. So, excuse me, at this point, I'll just run through the list. So the Libby with jump pack, he had a Force Staff and a Storm Bolter. And what's interesting is the Libby, I mean, it's not written on the list. We didn't have to write, obviously, extra relics on the list, but he would almost always take the Beacon Angelus, which is a relic that effectively pretty much acts as a Deathwatch teleport homer. A normal Deathwatch teleport homer, if an enemy unit gets within 9 inches of it, it disappears, kind of like old school servo skulls. But that doesn't happen with the relic, right? The relic's on the Libby, and at any point you can teleport a unit to within 6 of him, as long as you're still 9 inches away from the enemy. But that's really, really good because it also gives you an extra beacon, but that's a beacon that can be used more aggressively because your teleport homers you deploy in your deployment zone, but you can slingshot that Libby forward or deep strike him, and then you can teleport a Deathwatch unit to near the Libby. And that allowed me to be a lot more mobile, and it evoked some of the experience I've had this year using Gate with Grey Knights. So Grey Knights are really strong because they have access to Gate, and that's something that you can kind of get that pseudo Gate out of the Beacon Angelus. So that was a really powerful HQ. Then I had the Watchmaster. I've already discussed his role. He gives you full rerolls. So he's a Chapter Master style unit. that's why people take him. So some people, I watched a couple of people review my list, and a couple of people were thinking, why would you take such an expensive HQ? I don't think he's so expensive, but it's more that even though he might not give you his bang for his buck in terms of his combat capability, you just got him there for the reroll aura. So then, as I've said, I've got my homogenous units of Deathwatch. Then I had an Astra Militarum battalion that was Valhallan. There's a few reasons why I went with Valhallan, but none of them are super, super prominent. But in my unit, I've got my 2 company commanders. I didn't go with the Loyal 32. I went with the Loyal 52 because I took a unit of 30 conscripts instead of the 3rd Infantry Squad. So the reason why I did that was twofold. The first reason was I wanted to have a bigger screen because I'm running so many veteran squads that at some points I would deploy. It meant that you need to have more models to screen them out from things like demon drops and et cetera, other things that are coming at you like orcs or whatever. I never actually played orcs, but I was preparing for that possibility. So I wanted more models. I wasn't happy with just a Loyal 32. I needed a bigger screen, so I went with the 30 conscripts. But the other reason why I did that is because I wanted to make my screening units more difficult to kill. So I felt by having 30 conscripts, if my opponent does decide to put some shots into them on turn 1, maybe kill 15 to 20 of them, they're not going to finish the unit off, right? I can auto pass the CP roll, or in this case, I often took the Valhallan relic that lets you act as a commissar. Basically, lets a non-commissar model act as an old school commissar and just shoot somebody and make them auto pass. So that's why I felt like the conscripts were really going to work. They were not only going to act as a more effective screen, but they were going to allow me to mitigate the kill points I was going to give up. And then I also took a Wyvern in this detachment. And I was really like, even at the point I was on Down Under Network doing a little short interview after my game with Eric. And the dudes from Chapter Tactics asked me whether I was happy with, if there was anything with my list that I would change. And I kind of said the Wyvern's been a bit iffy, but the Wyvern actually really pulled its weight in the specific games, especially my last couple of games. I played Matt Morrisoli, who actually took down the Australian ITC overall this year. And the Wyvern was really effective against him because it allowed me to target models that were out of line of sight, like that were unable to be targeted. And it was the same against another demon player, Lee Abbey, who also had models that would trail back. And like the strategy that obviously excellent players use that are using horde armies is they always make those last few models hard to kill. So they'll let you kill the first 25 models. Okay, they're in line of sight. But then when there's those last 5 models, they'll be behind a ruin, right? So that's what the Wyvern was for. And that's why the Wyvern was in the list. And the Wyvern I would often pretty much always upgrade it to the Vigilist detachment, which let me pay CP to double shoot it, right? You can spend 2 command points and you get to shoot it twice. You can also combo that with the Imperial Guard, the Astra Militarum stratagem, to re-roll all hits. So by doing that, you kind of get 8d6 shots that re-roll all hits, right? And they can be fired over 2 different volleys. Now that does cost 4 CP, so it's pretty hefty, but it's worth it if it means you're going to get a big swing because you're actually going to get kill more in a specific turn. So even though people might look at that and say, well, I don't want to spend 4 CP just to shoot a Wyvern twice with rerolls, maybe you're right, but it really is a tactical kind of, what would you call it? It's like a little scalpel that you can use in very niche situations to achieve game-winning kind of outcomes. So that's why I included the Wyvern, and ultimately, I was happy I had it. It's also worth noting that I did have the Warlord as a company commander, generating me some command points and giving me that extra reroll, which was used primarily on my Crusader. So that was the last model in my army. So when I was writing this list, I thought, okay, so initially I wanted to have a Deathwatch battalion. That's what my army was predicated on. And then I kind of thought to myself, what gaps need to be filled? And Deathwatch are fantastic. They're versatile, they're powerful, but they're not particularly good at taking out armor. They don't really have the combat. I mean, you can tool them up to have the combat capability, but I just didn't want to overinvest and I didn't want to kind of blow my units out in cost. So I decided to include a knight, and I first kind of thought about the Castellan, because the Castellan is what the traditional Imperial super armies have been using for the last 6 months or so. But unfortunately in my army, even with my realization that I could include Imperial Guard Battalion, and that's what I went with. I wasn't going to have enough command points, right? Like I was just aware of the fact that I wasn't going to have enough command points, and Castellan really is a command point hungry unit. So I decided to go with a Crusader. So the Crusader's obviously got weapons that are powerful against light armor, like things like rhinos and ravagers and things like that. But I went with House Crast, which gives you a relic called, I think it's called the Huntsman's Helm or the Huntsman's Mask. And what it does is it gives you all your whole knight, like all the weapons on the knight, an extra damage against 10 wound or more models. And if you're versing Titanic units, you get an extra 2 damage per weapon. And that relic, that access to that Crast relic immediately allows the Crusader to become a pseudo, like a light Castellan. It's obviously not as good as a Raven Castellan, but it's a lot better than a normal Crusader, because then you're doing 3 damage with your Gatling cannons. You're doing D3 plus 1 damage with your battle cannons, and even your stubbers get 1 extra damage. And against knights, we'll get 2 extra damage on a stubber. So pretty interesting, pretty powerful, and my knight was extremely valuable and was certainly a very important part of the list. So even though some purists might look at this list and say, well, this is not a Deathwatch list, this is now a soup list. You know, I mean, maybe you're right, but I feel like the Deathwatch we're not going to be able to carry the full weight of you know, going through such a heavy, tough field without needing that support from the knight. The knight's also a bit of a lightning rod. A lot of people were choosing Kingslayer against the knight, because the knight becomes a character, and they were using it as a way to attempt to score secondary VPs. But when you know that your opponent's kind of hedging or betting on killing this model, you can just be a bit more cagey with it. And that's why I like the Crusader. It's got really long range guns. So because it's got a long range, you don't have to be so aggressive with it as you would with something like a Gallant. And you can sit at midfield, you can screen it, and your opponent might not get any wounds on it, or they might put some wounds on it. Then they realize, oh, damn, you know, like I'm not going to actually get these points, and they've wasted a lot of shots. So that was a really important, powerful tool within the list as well. So it's also worth noting regarding Warlord traits that the Crast Warlord trait is good as well. So it's not just the relic that you take Crast. The Warlord trait gives you reroll 1s to hit in both combat and shooting, which is quite good in games that you don't need Iron Bulwark. So Iron Bulwark's like your kind of default kind of strategy, like I'm going to get a 3-up invuln, right, with my shield. But in games where that's not relevant, like against demons, okay, you just reroll 1s. That's good, really good. And furthermore, there's a stratagem that gives you exploding 6s. So your 6s generate actual auto hits. So it's like Tesla kind of. And against Chaos, you get 2 extra hits in combat on 6s. So yeah, this knight was actually really good. So that's the list, guys. I was really happy with it. I went into the event a bit, you know what, I didn't go in thinking I was going to go as well as I did. I was hoping for 6 wins. And I think that was like pretty ambitious. But I was confident that I'd be able to score 6 wins, just because even if I lost a couple of games, I thought that maybe I'd drop into kind of the midfield, and then I'd be able to, you know, leverage the strength of my list and my experience to maybe go up to those 6 wins. But to go through, and even up until the last round, like I was in the running, right? Like if Eric lost his last game, I could have won. So I really am proud and happy with how powerfully this list was. So that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to do a brief overview of the reasons to why I chose the list, some basic tactics. I will kind of mention some things because I did go through the list. I'll mention some little minutiae of how the army operates for people that might think, okay, well, what do you actually do? Like, okay, you've got this army. All the stuff's kind of cool, but what do you do with it? Well, the way that the vets work is I almost never deep struck more than 1 unit of the veterans. You can quite happily deploy them on the board and just use them as just like, I don't know how you describe them. They're just powerhouse balls. Like think about them as like almost like a squad of intercessors or a squad of bikes or something that you would just kind of move up, shoot, move up. They're just advancing slowly, relentlessly, shooting up to 30-inch range, and when necessary, obviously you can leverage different ammo types. And you know, as a result, they're pushing and they're creating a lot of board presence and board pressure, right? So then your opponent kind of sees what you're doing. You've got your conscript line. Sometimes your conscripts will be behind, sometimes they'll be in front. You're moving forward. You're shooting with your wyvern. Your crusader's shooting as well. You're pushing towards objectives. You're forcing your opponent to really make a play. And they might make a play and get one of your units down to 1 or 2 models. They'll put a huge amount of shots in. You're kind of bouncing, juggling your wounds optimally, obviously leaving your Terminator to last because he's fearless. And not only that, but Terminators are the ones that can teleport, right? You have to have a Terminator in the unit to teleport. So very often, it happened multiple times in different games, where I'd have my last Terminator, my Cyclone Terminator left. They don't get, my opponent doesn't get that kill point, and then I teleport that Terminator to one of the beacons and hide him in a ruin. And then it's very hard for my opponent to get that kill point ever. And that is an extremely annoying but extremely powerful strategy to use. So you're advancing, and then when your unit hits like a point of critical weakness where it's no longer impactful, it's just going to be give up kills, just give up, allow your opponent to kind of do combat tricks on that last little couple of models. You're just like, you know what, it's not worth it anymore, teleporting back to an objective. And that's how I feel the army should be played. It should be played like you would an Eldar army with like warp spiders, a la 7th edition, or in the modern editions, like, things like Shining Spears, where you're very aggressive, but then when you start to feel like a bit of weakness, a bit of pressure, you use Soul Burst to like get out of combat and hide. And that's how Deathwatch can play. Okay, so that's the list, guys. If you've got any questions, please let me know. I've had some people message me and just ask kind of like for some strategy. If there's things I didn't cover, there's questions you have about how the list works, please feel free to comment in the video or just PM me, that's fine. I will also address the beta bolter rules, because that's something that people also are interested in. How is this going to affect this list? How is it going to affect Marines? So I'll spend another couple of minutes just addressing that on a more holistic level, because obviously Deathwatch aren't the only army that benefits, but I do think Deathwatch benefit the most from the beta bolter rules. And while kind of me bringing Deathwatch to Cancon was an experimental kind of very kind of avant-garde style of choice, not like everyone was super surprised when I submitted Deathwatch, I don't think that's the case anymore. And I'm not kind of crediting myself with that. Deathwatch just got a lot out of the beta rules. So being able to shoot up to the full rapid fire range when stationary is really good on an army that has 30-inch range on their bolters, right? And if you're running like intercessors, you get even another 6 inches on top. More importantly, though, there are a lot of models in a Deathwatch army that will kind of be under that kind of caveat of always getting the max rapid fire. So the Centurions, Bikes, and Termies. And we know that, as you can see from my list, that I've got some Bikes and some Termies in my list. And I think a Deathwatch list might shift a little bit more to include maybe a few more Termies, a few more Bikes. Those models will be extremely powerful now that they can just rapid fire to their maximum range. So we might see units of full Terminators, we might see units of full Bikes. I just think Space Marine Bikes and Space Marine Terminators have just received a massive upgrade across the board. So in my opinion, GW have done well in one respect, in that we are seeing Marines get a bit of a needed buff, but the reason I don't think it's necessary, or the way they may have missed the mark, is that the humble tactical Marine, I don't think they're the biggest beneficiary, right? Like when you think of a bolter, you think of a tactical Marine. You don't think of a biker, you don't think of a Terminator. So I feel like they just needed to buff the bolt gun, and Deathwatch bolt guns didn't even need this buff, right? I just think they should have said normal bolt guns, just the bolt gun, right? Give that the rule. Once again, they've created a rule that is going to buff everything except the tactical Marine. When you think about this rule, you don't think about taking tactical squads. You think about taking intercessors. You're thinking about taking Bikes. You think about taking Terminators. You might even think about taking Centurions. You also think about taking vehicles like Land Raider Crusaders, whatever, like Storm Ravens, whatever has access to like this kind of like wide array of bolt gun weapons. So does this change the way that Marines will be in the hierarchy? Yes, I think Marines are going to go up a tier or half a tier. They're going to be more powerful. Deathwatch is certainly going to be in the meta now, right? Like not only does special ammo already and their mixed units already make them an extremely powerful, potent force that's able to overcome big boogeymen like demons. It's got the ability. Like what was interesting and what I found, I don't know, like I was encouraged by it. People were saying, "Wow, like your army hard counters mine." Like, why did you hard counter this list? And I kind of thought to myself, well, that's not at all what I was thinking of hard countering. So a lot of my opponents just felt like they were being totally punished and totally victimized by this list when the list wasn't really designed to even beat them. So that shows you how flexible Deathwatch are. That anybody that's playing them might feel, God, I feel like really on the ropes here. What's going on? Well, a lot of people were saying that. So they're certainly a force, and they certainly will get better with the beta bolter rules. I'll quickly, as a caveat, mention just Grey Knights, because I know I've been touching on Grey Knights, I've been working with Grey Knights. I'm not going to stop with my Grey Knights, but they also benefit heavily from the beta bolter rules. I think they're, along with Deathwatch, probably the most beneficiary kind of army or codex, because often with Grey Knights, recently, you would need to be very, very, very aggressive with them, because you want to get into that rapid fire range with storm bolters. And when you're taking things with power armor, really, they don't have access to storm shields like Deathwatch 2. The Grey Knights would just get destroyed. They would just get on the backswing. You might like do 300 or 400 points of damage with the Grey Knights. Then on the backswing, you lose 600 points worth. And it just never felt good. But now with these longer range bolters, you can play more cagey. Maybe you deploy Grey Knights. Maybe you deploy in cover. You deep strike into cover so that you use things like Astral Aim to be able to shoot from throughout cover. Get your full amount of rapid fire shots. It also makes Grey Knight Terminators, I think, like in my review, if you look a couple of videos back, I was discussing like the way Chapter Approved affects Grey Knights. I was disappointed that Strike Marines are still like Grey Knight's best troop choice. But now with this beta change, I actually legitimately, genuinely feel maybe Terminators are better now, because now the Terminators can drop and shoot up to 24, right? You know, they don't have to go into their phase. They don't have to put themselves in harm's way straight away. They don't have to get smarted off the board. So now Terminators or even Paladins might become the go-to choice for Grey Knights because of that access to that kind of no restricted rule for the beta rule. So anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know what you think, and see you next time.